The air smelled faintly of rain that Sunday afternoon, when the car rolled up the hill toward the newest housing development on Silver Hill. From the back seat, I pressed my hand to the window, watching sunlight glint off the glass of a mansion perched on the ridge. Its white columns stood proud against the gray sky, the kind of house that looked like it belonged to someone whose life had never known uncertainty. For a moment, I imagined myself there, standing on the balcony, wind in my hair, holding a cup of coffee as the city glittered below. It wasn't just a house, it was the life I'd always wanted, calm, safe mine. Stop dreaming. Dad's voice cut through my thoughts. I blinked, turning toward him. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale. "You'll never afford a place like this," he added, his tone heavy with that blend of irritation and pity I'd grown used to. From the passenger seat, Ethan snorted. My brother's smirk was the kind that used to charm teachers and girlfriends, but always made me feel small. "She can't even pay her rent on time, Dad," he said, leaning back casually. "Maybe she can design one of these houses someday, if someone else pays for the materials." They laughed, both of them. I didn't. I looked out the window again, at the house on the hill. I didn't answer because arguing wouldn't change anything. In our family, silence was safer than honesty. The next morning, I woke before dawn to catch the early train. My tiny apartment smelled faintly of paint thinner and stale coffee. The wallpaper peeled near the window, and my bed creaked if I so much as breathed. Still, I loved that place. It was mine. Barely, but mine. At work, I spent my hours sketching blueprints I'd never sign my name to. As a junior architect, my designs were often justed by people higher up before they reached a client. Sometimes, I'd see fragments of my ideas living in someone else's portfolio, praised as visionary. I told myself it was just the way the industry worked. At lunch, while my coworkers chatted about weekend brunches and vacations, I scrolled through listings of homes, places with gardens, light and quiet. Every time I saw a photo of Silver Hill Estate, my chest ached a little. That night, Dad called. "You're still at that same job, right?" he asked. "Yes," I said, balancing the phone against my shoulder while I microwaved noodles. "You're 30 now, Mira. Don't you think it's time to stop waiting for miracles?" I paused. "I'm not waiting. I'm building," he sighed, long and tired. "You sound like your mother when she used to talk about opening her own shop. Dreamers, both of you. And look where that got her." The line went quiet for a moment, and I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I have to go, Dad," I said softly, and hung up before my voice could break. Later that week, Ethan dropped by unannounced. He stood in my doorway, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my month's salary. "You still living here?" he asked, glancing around with barely concealed disdain. "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone even. He leaned against the doorframe. "You know, Dad and I were talking. If you need help paying your rent, I could." "I'm fine," I interrupted. He smiled like he didn't believe me. "You should come see the open house on Silver Hill next weekend. They're showing the place you drooled over last month. Maybe it'll motivate you to find something realistic." When he left, the silence felt heavier than usual. I sank onto the edge of my bed, staring at my sketches pinned to the wall. Lines and colors, fragments of impossible dreams. I whispered to the empty room. Maybe one day. Outside, the city lights flickered against the dark sky, like stars that refused to die out no matter how many times the night tried to swallow them. And I made myself a quiet promise. If dreaming was a sin, then I would sin 1,000 times over, until the dream was mine. The following months blurred together like one long, gray day. Morning bled into night, and the hum of my computer replaced the sound of sleep. My apartment grew smaller each week, the walls closing in as if mocking my ambition. Still, I kept working. By day, I was a junior architect, a background player in someone else's dream. By night, I studied real estate, business strategy, and investment spreadsheets until my eyes burned. I wasn't sure which fire burned brighter inside me, exhaustion or hunger. Every Friday, Ethan called with his weekly check-in, which was less about concern and more about comparison. So, still at that little firm? He'd ask, feigning politeness. Yes, I'd reply, keeping my tone level. Dad says you're working too hard for too little. You should join my company instead. Marketing, not architecture. You're good with people, not numbers. I bit my tongue. He didn't know how many nights I spent with a calculator in one hand and my sketchbook in the other, mapping every possible route to independence. But his words lingered, and some nights they echoed louder than my resolve. One Thursday afternoon, my boss dropped a thick file on my desk. Need you to do some preliminary concepts for the Hastings renovation, she said. Keep it clean, modern, timeless. You've got 3 days. The Hastings project was a big deal. A commercial contract worth millions. I didn't sleep much that weekend, sketching every corner, every beam, every window. I imagined walking through that finished space someday, knowing I had shaped it. On Monday morning, I handed in my proposal. She nodded briefly. Nice work, Mira. We'll review and get back to you. A week later, the design was presented to the client. I wasn't invited to the meeting. I didn't expect to be. I was still junior. But 2 days after, I saw the proposal board in the conference room. The title read Concept Design by Ethan Hartwell Consulting. My breath caught. Ethan's company logo sat where mine should have been. The design, my design, was the same. Every curve, every line, every calculated shadow. I felt the blood drain from my face. I found out later that our firm had outsourced part of the Hastings project for consultation, and Ethan's company had been brought in. He had simply taken my concept and presented it as his own. When I called him, my hands were shaking. You stole my design, I said, my voice breaking between anger and disbelief. Relax, he replied smoothly. It's business. You work for them, I work for me. It's not personal. It is personal. You knew it was mine. He sighed. Like I was the one being unreasonable. You should have protected it better. Maybe next time, don't show your sketches to everyone. The line went dead before I could answer. That night, I sat at my desk staring at the city lights. I thought about Dad's words. You'll never afford a place like this. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was foolish to think I could ever build something that couldn't be taken from me. Tears burned my eyes, but they didn't fall. Crying wouldn't rebuild anything. So, I opened my notebook, the one where I kept every goal, every note, every dream. On a blank page, I wrote one sentence in capital letters. A WN samgeg, no oni kanteki adoay. I didn't know how I would do it yet, but I would. From then on, every spare dollar went into savings. I stopped eating out, stopped buying new clothes, stopped trying to explain myself to people who didn't care to understand. A year later, I walked past Silver Hill again. The house still stood there, quiet, magnificent, waiting. I stood at the gate, the wind catching my hair, and whispered, someday. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a promise, one carved not from hope, but from everything I'd lost. And I vowed that the next time my father and brother saw me standing here, it wouldn't be as the girl who couldn't pay her rent. It would be as the woman who owned the view they said she'd never afford. 3 years can pass quietly when you're too busy surviving to notice the seasons. The Mira who once trembled at her brother's laughter no longer existed. In her place stood someone quieter, harder, sharper. A woman forged from long nights, short paychecks, and an unyielding dream. I left the firm not long after the Hastings betrayal. No resignation party, no farewell lunch. I just packed my desk into a single cardboard box and walked out into the rain. My boss didn't even look up. That suited me fine. I'd already decided my worth didn't need her acknowledgement. For a while I freelanced, taking small renovation projects, sketching layouts for coffee shops and old apartments that needed a second chance at beauty. The pay was barely enough, but every client who smiled, every space I transformed, stitched a little strength back into me. One afternoon, I got an email from an old university mentor, Professor Delaney. He had seen my designs online. "You still have that spark," he wrote. "Ever thought of starting your own firm?" I almost laughed when I read it. A firm. I could barely afford printer ink. But he believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, and that belief became the soil where courage took root. Delaney offered me a small office space behind his studio, just a single room with flickering lights and a leaky roof. Still, when I painted the walls white and hung my first design sketches, it felt like the beginning of something. I called it Haven Design Studio, because that's what it was to me. A haven, a place where dreams didn't have to apologize for existing. The first few months were brutal. Some clients never paid on time, some didn't pay at all. I lost sleep, skipped meals, and wondered if I'd made the worst mistake of my life. But each time doubt crept in, I'd picture the house on Silver Hill, the one my father had laughed at, and I'd work harder. Then came a turning point. One evening, while sipping stale coffee, I received an inquiry from a woman named Clara Monroe. She wanted to renovate her late grandmother's cottage, a modest project. But she'd heard I was honest and kind. I didn't think much of it at first. When I arrived, the cottage was falling apart, peeling paint, broken shutters, vines strangling the porch. But inside those crumbling walls, I saw potential. I told Clara what I saw, not just in the structure, but in the story. "You see more than walls," she said softly. The renovation took months. But when it was done, the cottage looked like something out of a fairy tale. Warm light, reclaimed wood, and soul. Clara cried when she saw it. A week later, she referred me to 3 more clients. Word spread. Soon, Haven Design Studio was thriving. The years rolled on. I built slowly, carefully. My savings grew. I learned to negotiate, to invest, to walk into rooms where once I'd been invisible, and speak like I belonged there. One morning, while scrolling through property listings for a client, I froze. Silver Hill Estate. For sale. The house, my house. The same one that had lived rent, free in my dreams for nearly a decade. My heart raced. I clicked through the photos, the marble staircase, the wide glass balcony, the oak doors. The price was steep. Impossibly so, years ago. But now it wasn't out of reach. I ran the numbers again and again. Between my savings, investments, and a small loan from a trusted partner, I could do it. The day I signed the papers, the pen trembled in my hand. When the realtor handed me the keys, I didn't smile right away. I just stood there, numb, overwhelmed by the weight of everything that had led here. Every insult, every sleepless night, every small act of defiance. That evening, I stood in the grand foyer of Silver Hill Estate. The same house my father said I'd never afford. The sunset spilled golden light across the floor, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly at peace. I whispered into the stillness, "We made it." Not just me, but every version of myself who refused to give up when giving up would have been easier. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of Silver Hill Estate, painting the walls gold. I walked barefoot across the polished floor, still half expecting to wake up in my old apartment, still half afraid it might all disappear. Owning the house hadn't felt real yet. Sometimes, I would trace the curve of the staircase, just to remind myself it was mine. The banister smoothed beneath my fingers, the scent of cedar and possibility lingering in the air. A soft chime echoed from my phone. A message from the realtor. Just confirming. The open tour is scheduled for next week, Sunday. We'll welcome potential buyers as planned, though the listing will show as sold. Standard practice for promotional purposes. I smiled. That open tour was mostly for marketing. People still loved seeing the famous Silver Hill property, even though it was already taken. But something about that date made me pause. Sunday. My father's favorite day for drives to teach life lessons. I shook the thought away, busying myself with unpacking. Yet, the universe, in its quiet humor, wasn't done writing my story. The following Sunday arrived with the faint chill of early autumn. I was in the study, sorting through blueprints, when the doorbell rang. The realtor had arrived early to prepare for the viewing. "You'll stay during the tour?" she asked politely. "I might," I said with a smile. "I'd like to see who falls in love with it next." She nodded and went to greet the visitors. I stayed upstairs, half hidden, listening to footsteps echo in the entryway. Then I heard a voice I knew too well. "Would you look at that?" Ethan said, his tone full of forced laughter. "This is the house I've always wanted Dad to see. Maybe someday, right?" My heart stopped. Another voice joined, my father's. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "A man could die happy living here. Your sister, she used to talk about this house. She still rents that shoebox apartment." Ethan replied, "Dreaming doesn't pay mortgages." I gripped the stair railing, breathing slowly. The irony of it all, that they were here, walking through my home, unaware that their old words still echoed in these halls. It was almost poetic. I didn't plan to reveal myself. I truly didn't, but fate has its own timing. As they moved toward the great room, the realtor called out, "Let me introduce you to the owner." Their laughter faltered. I stepped into the sunlight. For a second, no one spoke. My father's face drained of color. Ethan's smirk collapsed into disbelief. "Mira," Dad whispered, eyes wide. I smiled gently, holding up the silver keychain that still dangled from my fingers, the one with my initials engraved. "Welcome," I said softly, "to my home." Ethan blinked, as if trying to understand. You bought this place?" "Yes," I said simply. "Last month." Dad's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked around the foyer, his eyes darting from the chandelier to the grand staircase, as if searching for proof that it wasn't real. "But how?" he managed. "You couldn't even pay rent." I finished for him, my tone calm. "Yes, you told me that." Silence filled the room, thick, heavy, undeniable. Ethan's jaw clenched. "You must have had help. No way you did this on your own." "I did," I replied. "And I did it the hard way, the kind that doesn't come with shortcuts or stolen designs." His eyes flickered, guilt flashing and dying just as fast. Dad looked down, shame softening the stubborn pride in his face. I didn't want revenge. Not really. What I wanted was this moment for them to see me. "It's beautiful, Mira," Dad finally said, his voice small. "You made something of yourself." "I did," I said gently. "But it wasn't about proving you wrong. It was about proving I was enough." The realtor, sensing the private weight of the moment, quietly excused herself. I walked them to the door. Ethan didn't meet my eyes. Dad hesitated before stepping outside. "You were always the dreamer," he said quietly. "I guess I just didn't see where dreaming could lead." "It leads here?" I said with a faint smile. "Sometimes you have to believe in what no one else can see." He nodded once, his gaze full of something almost like pride or regret, then turned away. When they were gone, I stood at the doorway, the wind from the hill brushing my hair. The silence of the house was no longer empty. It was peaceful, earned. I walked to the balcony, looking out over the city. The same view I had once only imagined was now mine. "Still dreaming, Dad," I whispered. Only this time, I never stopped.